Picture this: a man at the absolute pinnacle of success, commanding a boardroom full of investors worth billions, about to close the most important deal of his career. But in the next 60 seconds, one phone call would force him to confront the most devastating choice he'd ever made. The day he chose money over love, power over parenthood, and reputation over the woman carrying his child. The chrome and glass conference room on the 47th floor of McAllister Tower gleamed like a temple to capitalism. Reed McAllister, 40 years old and worth more than most small countries, sat at the head of a table where 12 of Manhattan's most powerful investors hung on his every word. The Singapore tech merger spread across holographic displays would cement his position as the most influential businessman on the East Coast. "Gentlemen," Reed's voice carried the authority of a man who'd never lost a negotiation, "this acquisition will revolutionize cloud computing across 3 continents. We're not just buying a company, we're purchasing the future itself." Nods of approval rippled around the table, numbers flashed on screens, billions in projected revenue, market dominance that would last decades. Reed felt the familiar rush, of conquest, the intoxicating certainty that came with absolute control over his destiny. But beneath the surface confidence, something felt hollow. Maybe it was the empty penthouse he'd returned to that night, where his 6-year-old son Elias would already be asleep, cared for by Mrs. Patterson, the latest in a series of nannies who provided professional competence but no real warmth. Reed pushed the thought away. This was his life, ordered, successful, uncomplicated by the messy emotions that destroyed other men's careers. Then his phone buzzed. Reed glanced at the screen, expecting another business contact. Instead, he saw words that made his blood freeze. "Riverside Elementary School. Emergency." "Excuse me for a moment," Reed told the investors, stepping toward the window wall overlooking Manhattan's sprawling grid of ambition and commerce. "Mr. McAllister." The voice belonged to Mrs. Chen, Elias's teacher, but the professional calm couldn't hide her underlying panic. "There's been an accident during recess. Elias fell from the playground equipment and hit his head. The paramedics are taking him to Children's Hospital right now." Reed's carefully constructed world tilted off its axis. "How bad is it?" "He was unconscious for several minutes, sir. You need to get to the hospital immediately." The phone slipped from Reed's fingers, clattering to the marble floor like his entire sense of control. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan spread below him, a kingdom he'd built through ruthless determination and calculated risks. But none of that mattered when your child was lying unconscious in an ambulance. Reed turned to face the room full of investors, their expectant faces slowly registering that something fundamental had shifted. "Gentlemen, we'll need to postpone this meeting." Postpone? Gerald Hartman, Reed's lead counsel, looked genuinely confused. "Reed, the Singapore team flies out tonight. If we don't close this today, my son is in the hospital." The words hung in the air like a declaration of war against everything Reed had built his life around. For 7 years, since Elias was born, business had always come first. Meetings were never cancelled, deals were never delayed, and personal. Emergencies were handled by paid professionals, while Reed maintained his focus on what really mattered, building an empire. But standing in that conference room, watching his phone's cracked screen reflect the fluorescent lights, Reed realized that everything he'd convinced himself mattered was actually meaningless when measured against the possibility of losing his son. "We'll reschedule when I know Elias is safe." Reed walked out of his own boardroom, leaving behind $50 billion in potential revenue and the shocked faces of men who'd never seen him choose anything over profit. As the elevator descended toward the parking garage, Reed's mind raced with guilt and self-recrimination. When was the last time he'd actually talked to Elias about something other than homework or behavior reports? When was the last time he'd been present for a scraped knee or a bad dream? The truth was devastating in its simplicity. Reed had spent 6 years being Elias's provider, while failing completely to be his father, a son the chance to know the mother who was stolen from him before he was even born. Reed's Bentley tore through Manhattan traffic with the desperation of a man racing against his own conscience. His driver, Marcus, had worked for the McAllister family since before Elias was born, and he'd never seen his usually unflappable employer display anything approaching genuine panic. Children's Hospital, Mr. McAllister? As fast as you can legally drive. But even as Reed urged more speed, his mind kept circling back to the same impossible question. How had he become the kind of father whose son's teacher had to call him about emergencies? Shouldn't he have been the first person they contacted? Shouldn't he have been the emergency contact, not just another name on a list after the nanny and the housekeeper? The truth was more complicated and more shameful than Reed wanted to admit. He deliberately distanced himself from Elias's daily life, convincing himself that providing financial security was more important than emotional presence. It was easier to hire professionals to handle childhood crises than to risk the messy vulnerability that came with actual parenting. Reed's phone buzzed with updates from his assistant Margaret, who was already coordinating with the hospital, ensuring Elias would receive the best possible care. Money could solve most problems efficiently, and Reed had always relied on that principle to manage the parts of life that felt too unpredictable to control directly. But as the Bentley approached the hospital, Reed felt a growing certainty that money wouldn't be enough this time. If Elias was seriously injured, if there were complications, if Reed had to face the possibility of loss, no amount of wealth could protect him from the consequences of his own emotional abdication. Through the tinted windows, Reed watched other families walking together on sidewalks, parents holding small hands, children chattering excitedly about their days, the ordinary magic of connection that Reed had systematically avoided since Elias was born. The memory he'd been suppressing for 6 years finally broke through his defenses. Amara's face the last day he'd seen her, tears streaming as she stood in his penthouse living room, her hand resting protectively over her growing belly. "This is our child, Reed, our baby. How can you ask me to just disappear? It's not disappearing, it's being practical. You'll be financially secure. The child will have every advantage. But this arrangement, us living together, pretending we're a family, it's not sustainable. Why? Because I'm not the right color? Because I don't come from the right background? Because your family will never accept me?" Reed had chosen silence over honesty that day, because the truth would have required admitting that she was right about all of it. His mother had made her position crystal clear. "That woman is beneath you, Reed. Beautiful, perhaps, but completely unsuitable for the McAllister name. You cannot seriously be considering legitimizing this situation." So Reed had chosen the path of least resistance. He'd hired lawyers to ensure Amara received substantial financial support, but no parental rights. He'd convinced himself he was protecting Elias from the complications of an unsuitable mother, giving his son the stability of a proper upbringing rather than the chaos of a mixed-race household that would never be accepted in their social circle. But now, racing toward a hospital where his son lay injured, Reed wondered if he'd actually been protecting himself from the vulnerability of loving someone who might leave, someone who might reject the carefully controlled world he'd built. "We're here, sir." The hospital loomed ahead like a monument to human fragility, all glass and steel reaching toward the sky. Its emergency entrance a portal between the world where Reed's money meant everything and the world where only love mattered. Reed stepped out of the Bentley and walked toward those automatic doors, knowing that whatever waited on the other side would change everything he thought he understood about fatherhood, family, and the true cost of the choices he'd made 6 years ago. Reed burst through the emergency department doors with the controlled panic of a man accustomed to solving crises through decisive action. The smell of antiseptic and human anxiety hit him immediately, along with the controlled chaos of medical professionals managing multiple emergencies simultaneously. "My son," Reed told the reception desk, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to immediate attention. "Elias McAllister, 6 years old. Playground accident about an hour ago." The receptionist's fingers flew over her computer. "Room 312, pediatric wing, 3rd floor." Reed ran toward the elevators, his expensive Italian shoes clicking against linoleum. Floors designed for function rather than elegance. Other families filled the waiting areas, some crying, some praying, all united in the terrible vulnerability that comes when the people you love most are beyond your ability to protect. The elevator seemed to take forever. each floor announcement echoing in Reed's chest like a countdown to judgment. When the doors finally opened on the pediatric wing, he was struck by how different this environment felt from the business world he inhabited. Soft colors, gentle lighting, artwork clearly created by young patients, everything designed to comfort rather than impress. Room 312 was just ahead, and through the small window, Reed could see a small figure in a hospital bed that seemed far too large for a 6-year-old body. But it wasn't Elias that made Reed freeze in the doorway. It was the woman sitting beside his son's bed, holding a small hand in both of hers, speaking. In the low, soothing tones that Reed remembered with devastating clarity. Amara, 6 years. 6 years since he'd seen that face, heard that voice. Been in the presence of the woman who'd once carried his child and whom he'd systematically erased from their lives. She wore scrubs that marked her as hospital staff, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her face showing the kind of quiet strength that came from surviving betrayal and choosing forgiveness over bitterness. But what stopped Reed's world completely was the expression on Elias's face as he looked at Amara. Pure trust, complete contentment. The kind of relaxed joy that Reed couldn't remember ever seeing directed at him. Elias was talking animatedly, despite the bandages on his head, his eyes bright with the enthusiasm Reed only saw when his son was discussing something he truly loved. And he was looking at Amara as if she was the most wonderful person in the world, because she was his mother, the mother Reed had stolen from him before he was even born. Reed's carefully suppressed memories flooded back. Amara's face when she first felt the baby kick, her excitement about choosing names, planning a nursery, dreaming about the family they could build together, her devastation when Reed's lawyers presented her with documents that would give her financial security, but no parental rights, no place. In her own child's life, Reed had convinced himself it was for the best. Elias would grow up with stability, privilege, opportunities that a mixed-race child with a working-class mother might not have. He would be a McAllister heir, not a complication that required explanation or defense. But watching Amara with their son now, Reed saw what his choice had actually cost. Not just Amara's chance at motherhood, but Elias's chance to grow up feeling unconditionally loved by someone who'd wanted him from the moment of conception. Amara looked up suddenly, perhaps sensing she was being observed. Her brown eyes met Reed's through the glass, and he saw a complex mixture of emotions flash across her features: surprise, recognition, something that might have been sadness or resignation. She said something to Elias, who turned toward the door. When the boy saw Reed, his expression shifted into something that made Reed's chest ache. Careful politeness, the look of a child who'd learned to manage his expectations around the primary adult in his life. Reed pushed open the door, stepping into a room that felt charged with the weight of 6 years of separation and all the love that had been denied. "Hello, Reed," Amara said quietly, her voice carrying professional composure that couldn't quite hide the emotional undercurrents of their shared history. "Amara," Reed's voice came out rougher than intended. "I didn't know you worked here. I've been here for 3 years. I was doing community health outreach when they brought Elias in. I happened to be the volunteer coordinator on duty." Reed's son looked between them with the acute perception that children possess when adults are trying to hide complicated truths. "Miss Amara stayed with me the whole time," Elias said, his voice small but trusting. "She told me stories so I wouldn't be scared when they took the pictures of my brain." Reed felt something crack inside his chest. His son had been frightened and alone, and a stranger, who wasn't actually a stranger, had provided the comfort that Reed should have been there to give. "How is he?" Reed asked, addressing both Amara and the question he was most afraid to hear answered. "The CT scan was clear," Amara replied, with the calm competence of someone trained to deliver medical information to worried families. "Mild concussion. Some stitches where he hit the playground equipment. He'll need to be monitored for the next few days, but the doctors expect a full recovery." Reed sagged with relief so profound it left him momentarily dizzy. "I want to go home," Elias said quietly, looking not at Reed but at Amara. "Will you come with us?" The question hung in the air like a bridge spanning 6 years of separation. Reed saw the conflict on Amara's face, the mother's instinct to say yes warring with the knowledge that she had no legal right to be involved in decisions about their child. "That's up to your father," Amara said carefully, but Reed caught the longing in her voice. Reed looked at his son, really looked at him, and saw something he'd been missing for months. Elias wasn't just polite around him. He was careful, guarded, managing his own emotional needs because he'd learned not to expect too much from the one person who should have provided unconditional love. Standing in that hospital room, Reed finally understood the true cost of the choice he'd made 6 years ago. He hadn't just denied Amara her place in their son's life, he'd denied Elias the chance to grow up feeling completely loved and wanted. The question now was whether Reed had the courage to admit his mistake and ask for a second chance at being the family they should have been from the beginning. Dr. Patricia Valdez was exactly the kind of pediatric specialist Reed had expected to find at the city's most prestigious children's hospital. Competent, compassionate, and blessed with the particular combination of medical expertise and emotional intelligence that made her extraordinarily effective with both young patients and their worried families. She found Reed in the family consultation area adjacent to Elias's room, where he'd retreated after watching Amara help their son settle in for observation. Through the doorway he could see them together, Amara reading from a book she'd somehow produced, Elias listening with the kind of rapt attention Reed couldn't remember ever receiving from his own child. "Mr. McAllister, I'm Dr. Valdez." Reed stood immediately, straightening into the posture of control that had served him well in countless business negotiations, but felt somehow inadequate in this medical setting where vulnerability was often more useful than authority. "Doctor, please tell me everything about my son's condition. Let's sit down so we can discuss this properly." She gestured toward chairs positioned to allow continued visual contact with Elias's room. Reed's stomach clenched, interpreting the invitation as preparation for difficult news. "Physically, Elias is going to make a complete recovery," Dr. Valdez began, and Reed felt his entire body relax with relief. "The concussion is mild, the stitches will heal cleanly, and there's no sign of any lasting neurological impact. Thank God. However, Mr. McAllister, I do have some observations about Elias that extend beyond his physical injuries." Reed's brief relief began to transform into a different kind of anxiety. "What kind of observations?" Dr. Valdez consulted. Her tablet, scrolling through notes with the careful precision of someone trained to translate complex medical situations into language worried parents could understand. "When children Elias's age experience trauma, we typically see very predictable emotional responses. They cry for their parents, they ask repeatedly when they can go home, they seek immediate comfort from familiar adults. Sometimes they regress to younger behaviors as a coping mechanism. That sounds normal. It is normal. It's exactly what we expect and hope to see because it indicates healthy emotional development and secure attachment." Dr. Valdez paused, choosing her words carefully. "But Elias displayed almost none of these typical responses." Reed felt a cold weight settling in his chest. "What do you mean?" When the paramedics brought him in, he was remarkably composed for a child who just experienced significant trauma. He answered our medical questions clearly, followed instructions without protest, and never once asked when his father would arrive. Each word felt like a small, precise blow to Reed's heart. "Never asked for me?" He asked one question repeatedly. "Is Miss Amara here today?" When we confirmed that she was volunteering in our emergency department and could be assigned to his care, he relaxed completely. It was as if he'd been holding himself together until the right person arrived to take care of him. Reed stared through the consultation room window at his son, who was now laughing at something Amara was demonstrating, probably shadow puppets on the wall based on the hand gestures. The sound of Elias's genuine joy was both beautiful and heartbreaking because Reed couldn't remember being the cause of such spontaneous happiness. "Dr. Valdez, I need to understand something. How does Elias know Amara? They've never met before today." The lie came easily, born from 6 years of practice at rewriting his family's history. Dr. Valdez studied Reed's face with the clinical assessment skills that made her so effective at reading complicated family dynamics. "Mr. McAllister, children have an extraordinary ability to recognize people who represent safety and unconditional love, even when they can't consciously remember previous encounters. But in this case, I don't think we're talking about unconscious recognition. Reed's pulse quickened. What do you mean? When we were taking Elias's medical history, he mentioned that he recognized Miss Amara from photographs. He said he has pictures in his room of the pretty lady who looks like me. Reed's world tilted off its axis. Elias had photographs of Amara. That was impossible. Reed had been meticulous about ensuring no traces of their relationship remained in the penthouse. No reminders of the choice he'd made, or the woman he'd erased from their lives. That's not possible. There are no photographs of Amara in our home. Perhaps you should ask Elias about that, Dr. Valdez suggested gently. Children are often more observant than we realize. They notice things adults think they've hidden, and they draw conclusions from information we don't think they possess. Reed felt the foundation of his carefully constructed narrative beginning to crack. Had Elias somehow discovered the truth about Amara? Had Reed's attempts to protect his son from complicated family history actually created more confusion and pain? Dr. Valdez, what would you recommend for Elias's recovery? Beyond the medical care, I mean. Concussion recovery in children requires more than just physical healing. Elias needs emotional stability, consistent care from people he trusts, and the freedom to process this trauma without additional stress. She gestured toward the room where Amara was now teaching Elias to make paper airplanes with hospital napkins. I've rarely seen a child respond so positively to a caregiver. Miss Amara has an extraordinary gift for making young patients feel safe and understood. If it were possible for her to assist with Elias's home care during his recovery, I think it would be tremendously beneficial. Reed found himself at a crossroads he'd been avoiding for 6 years. He could continue the lie, maintain the fiction that Amara was just a helpful stranger who'd happened to connect with his son, or he could finally face the truth about what he'd stolen from both of them. Dr. Valdez, there's something I need to tell you about Amara and Elias. The doctor waited with the patient attention of someone trained to hear difficult family truths. Amara is Elias's mother, his biological mother. We have a complicated history. Dr. Valdez's expression didn't change, but Reed saw understanding. Dawn in her eyes, I see. And Miss Field's current relationship with Elias is non-existent. By my choice. I have full custody. Amara has had no contact with him since he was born. But Elias recognizes her. He has photographs, Reed realized, that his son was far more perceptive than he'd given him credit for. Somehow, despite Reed's efforts to erase Amara from their lives, Elias had discovered the truth about his mother. Mr. McAllister, I'm not going to pretend to understand the circumstances that led to this arrangement, but I will say this. Your son needs stable, loving care during his recovery, and from what I've observed today, Miss Fields provides exactly that kind of care. Dr. Valdez stood, preparing to continue her rounds, but she paused with one final observation. Children who grow up knowing they're loved unconditionally recover from trauma more quickly and completely than children who feel they have to earn affection. Whatever your history with Ms. Fields, she clearly loves Elias without reservation. That's not something you can hire, Mr. McAllister. That's something you can only choose to accept or reject. After the doctor left, Reed remained in the consultation area, staring through the window at the woman who'd once carried his child and the son who'd somehow discovered her existence despite Reed's best efforts to keep them apart. For 6 years, Reed had convinced himself that his choice was protecting Elias from complications. But watching them together now, seeing the joy and security on his son's face, Reed began to understand that he'd actually been protecting himself from the vulnerability of admitting he'd made the worst mistake of his life. The question was whether he had the courage to fix it. Reed now faces the devastating realization that Elias somehow knows Amara is his mother, despite Reed's efforts to hide this truth. He must decide whether to continue the lie that has shaped their lives, or finally give high. The ride home from the hospital stretched like a journey between two different worlds. Reed's Bentley glided through Manhattan traffic with its usual silent efficiency, but the atmosphere inside felt charged with unspoken truths and 6 years. They have carefully maintained lies. Elias sat in his booster seat, the hospital discharge papers clutched in his small hands, his head still bandaged, but his eyes bright with an excitement Reed hadn't seen in months. Beside him, Amara maintained professional composure, but Reed could sense her nervousness about entering the world she'd been banished from 6 years ago. "Miss Amara," Elias said, breaking the silence with the directness only children possess, "are you going to stay at our house tonight?" Reed felt his chest tighten. The doctor had recommended someone stay with Elias for the first 48 hours after his concussion, monitoring for symptoms, ensuring he didn't sleep too deeply, providing the kind of constant attention that Reed's work schedule typically made impossible. "If your father thinks that's best," Amara replied carefully, her eyes meeting Reed's in the rearview mirror. "I want you to stay," Elias said, with the simple honesty that adults spend years learning to complicate. "You make everything feel safer." Reed's penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of McAllister Tower, a monument to architectural achievement and personal success that had been featured in design magazines for its clean lines, expensive materials, and stunning views of Central Park. But as they entered through the private elevator, Reed saw his home through Amara's eyes and felt ashamed of its cold perfection. Everything was precisely arranged, immaculately maintained, and utterly devoid of warmth. The living spaces looked like museum displays rather than rooms where a family actually lived. There were no finger smudges on the floor-to-ceiling windows, no toys scattered in casual abandonment, no signs that a 6-year-old boy called this place home. "Wow," Amara said quietly, taking in the marble floors, designer furniture and art collection that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. "It's very impressive." Reed heard what she didn't say. It was also completely inappropriate. "For a child, Mrs. Patterson maintains everything," Reed explained, referring to the housekeeper who ensured his home remained worthy of magazine spreads. "Elias has learned to be very careful with his belongings." Amara's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, and Reed realized how that sounded. A 6-year-old who'd been trained to live like a museum visitor in his own home. "Can I show Miss Amara my room?" Elias asked, tugging on Reed's sleeve with more enthusiasm than Reed had seen from him in months. Of course. Reed followed them down the hallway, past guest bedrooms that were never used and office spaces that reflected his need to work even at home. Elias's room was at the end of the hall, a space Reed had hired designers to create as the perfect child's environment. But watching Amara take in the custom furniture, educational toys arranged with mathematical precision, and walls decorated with awards from academic programs rather than childhood artwork, Reed began to see it differently. This wasn't a little boy's bedroom. It was a showroom designed to prove that money could provide everything a child needed. "This is beautiful, sweetheart," Amara said, kneeling to Elias's level as she examined his bookshelf. But Reed caught the sadness in her voice as she noted the pristine condition of toys that showed no signs of actual play. "And this is my special drawer," Elias said, pulling open the bottom drawer of his nightstand with the secretive excitement of a child sharing buried treasure. Reed watched in shock as his son produced a small collection of items that definitely didn't belong in the carefully curated space. Several printed photographs, a hospital bracelet, and what appeared to be a folded piece of paper. "See? I told you I had pictures of the pretty lady who looks like me." Elias held up the photographs, and Reed's world tilted completely off its axis. They were pictures of Amara, some from her social media profiles, others that appeared to be printed from news articles about her community health work. His 6-year-old son had somehow discovered his mother's existence and been secretly collecting evidence of her life. "Elias," Reed's voice came out strangled. "Where did you get these?" "Mrs. Patterson's computer. When she lets me play games, sometimes I search for pictures of people who look like me. I found Miss Amara in lots of places, and I printed the pictures when Mrs. Patterson wasn't looking." Reed felt the floor drop out from under him. His son had been conducting his own investigation into his family history, filling in the gaps that Reed had deliberately left empty. "And this," Elias continued, unfolding the piece of paper, "is my birth certificate. Mrs. Patterson keeps important papers in the kitchen drawer, and I looked at it one day when I was helping her organize. Reed stared at the document his son held, the birth certificate that clearly listed Amara Fields as mother, the legal proof of the relationship Reed had spent 6 years trying to erase. "You know," Amara said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "Don't you, sweetheart?" Elias nodded solemnly. "I figured it out a long time ago. Daddy doesn't like to talk about mommies, but I wanted to know who mine was. Are you sad that I found you?" Amara gathered Elias into her arms, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, baby, I'm not sad. I'm the happiest I've been in 6 years." Reed watched this reunion, the first real embrace between mother and child, and felt the full weight of what his choices had cost. Not just Amara's right to motherhood, but Elias's right to feel completely loved and wanted from birth. "Daddy," Elias said, looking at Reed over Amara's shoulder, "why did you tell everyone she went away? She's right here in the city." "I found articles about the clinic where she works helping sick kids." Reed realized that his son was far more perceptive and resourceful than he'd ever imagined. While Reed had been patting himself on the back for protecting Elias from complicated family dynamics, his son had been quietly piecing together the truth and wondering why his father had chosen lies over honesty. "It's complicated, Elias. That's what grown-ups always say when they don't want to tell the truth," Elias replied with devastating accuracy. "But I'm not stupid. I know Miss Amara is my mum, and I know you didn't want her to be." The simple statement hung in the air like an indictment of every choice Reed had made since Amara told him she was pregnant. "Why don't we get you settled in?" Amara said gently, sensing the emotional weight threatening to overwhelm them all. "You need rest, and your father and I need to talk." As Amara helped Elias prepare for bed, reading him stories, checking his bandages, providing the kind of nurturing care that Reed had always outsourced to professionals, Reed stood in the doorway, watching the family dynamic he'd deliberately prevented. This was what he'd stolen from both of them. Not just individual relationships, but the natural bond between mother and child, the easy intimacy that came from love freely given and gratefully received. And Elias had found his way back to it, despite every obstacle Reed had put in his path. That evening, Reed sat in his study reviewing quarterly reports while Amara remained with Elias, monitoring his concussion symptoms and providing the kind of constant attention the doctor had prescribed. Through the baby monitor he'd hastily installed, Reed could hear their quiet conversation. Amara asking about school, friends, favorite activities, all the details of Elias's life that Reed realized he knew embarrassingly little about. "Do you like living in this big apartment?" Amara asked. "It's okay, but it's really quiet. Sometimes I talk to myself just to hear voices." Reed's pen stopped moving across the financial documents. His son talked to himself because their home was too quiet. When had silence become preferable to the sound of a child's natural exuberance? "What do you do for fun, sweetheart?" "I read books, and I practice piano. Mrs. Patterson says I'm getting very good. And sometimes I watch educational programs about science and geography." Reed felt a growing unease as he listened to his son describe a childhood that sounded more like a preparation program for adulthood than actual childhood. Where were the messy art projects, the imaginary games, the silly songs and spontaneous laughter that other children seem to enjoy? That sounds very impressive. But what do you do just for fun, just because it makes you happy? A long pause. Reed found himself holding his breath, waiting for his son's answer. "I don't know. I guess I look at pictures of you on the computer. That makes me happy." Reed's chest tightened painfully. His son's primary source of joy was secretly looking at photographs of the mother he'd been denied. "Elias, can I tell you something?" "Okay. I never stopped thinking about you. Not for one single day. I always wondered if you were happy, if you were healthy, if you liked to read books the way I did when I was little. Really. You thought about me. Every day. And I wished things could be different." Reed realized he was eavesdropping on the conversation he should have facilitated years ago, his son finally meeting the mother who'd never stopped loving him. A soft knock on his study door interrupted his surveillance. Reed quickly turned off the monitor and called, "Come in." Amara entered quietly, closing the door behind her. She'd changed from her hospital scrubs into jeans and a sweater she'd apparently brought in an overnight bag, and Reed was struck by how naturally she fit into their home despite its cold formality. "He's asleep. His color is good, reflexes normal. I'll check on him every 2 hours as the doctor recommended." "Thank you." Reed gestured toward one of the leather chairs facing his desk. "Amara, we need to talk." She sat down carefully, maintaining the professional composure that had carried her through the day, but couldn't quite hide the emotional storm underneath. "Reed, I want you to know that I'm not here to disrupt your life or make demands. Elias needed care, I was available to provide it, and you made a practical decision. I understand that this doesn't change anything long-term. Doesn't it?" Amara looked surprised by the question. "I spent the last 3 hours listening to you talk with our son, and I realized something devastating. You know him better after one afternoon than I do after 6 years of living with him." Reed stood and walked to the window overlooking Central Park, where families were probably tucking their children into bed with kisses and bedtime stories and all the casual intimacy he'd systematically avoided. "You asked him about his friends, his favorite subjects, what makes him happy. I realized I don't know any of those things. I know his test scores, his academic achievements, his behavioral reports from school, but I don't know who he is as a person. Reed, I heard him tell you that he talks to himself because the house is too quiet. Do you know what that means? It means I've created an environment so sterile, so devoid of life that my 6-year-old son has to provide his own companionship." Reed turned back to face her, and Amara saw something in his expression she'd never seen before. Genuine vulnerability, mixed with deep shame. "I've been telling myself for 6 years that I was protecting him, giving him stability, structure, the best possible foundation for success. But I think what I was really doing was protecting myself from having to be emotionally present." "Why?" Amara's voice was gentle but direct. "What were you so afraid of?" Reed considered the question seriously. "Failing him the way I failed you, making promises I couldn't keep, letting him depend on me and then disappointing him when work demanded more than family time allowed. So instead, you chose not to try at all. I chose what felt safest. Professional. Care-structured environments, measured interactions that couldn't go wrong because they weren't really personal." Amara stood and joined him at the window, both of them looking out at the city lights that represented millions of other families, navigating love and loss and the complicated work of caring for each other. "Reed, can I ask you something honestly? Of course, do you regret having Elias? Do you wish none of this had happened?" The question hit Reed like a physical blow. "No. God, no. Elias is the best thing I've ever done with my life. He's the only thing that matters. Then why have you spent 6 years acting like he's a burden to be managed, rather than a gift to be cherished?" Reed felt tears building behind his eyes, an unfamiliar sensation for a man who'd trained himself to view emotion as weakness. "Because I was terrified of loving him the way I loved you, completely, without reservation, because that kind of love makes you vulnerable to devastating loss. And you thought it was better to guarantee the loss by never really connecting with him?" Reed realized that was exactly what he'd done. Rather than risk the possibility of failing as a father, he'd chosen the certainty of succeeding as a provider while failing as a parent. "I need to learn how to be his father, really be his father, not just his financial guardian." That's going to require more than good intentions, Reed. It's going to require you to show up consistently, even when it's inconvenient, especially when it's inconvenient. Will you help me? The question surprised them both. Amara studied Reed's face, looking for signs of the manipulation or calculation that had characterized their relationship 6 years ago. "What exactly are you asking?" "I'm asking if you'll stay. Not just for tonight, not just until Elias recovers from his concussion. Stay and help me learn to be the father he deserves. Help me figure out how to make this place feel like a home instead of a showroom. Reed, 6 years ago you made it very clear that I wasn't suitable to be part of your family. 6 years ago I was an idiot who chose other people's opinions over my own heart. I was a coward who let fear make my decisions for me." Reed moved closer to her, close enough to see the hope and skepticism warring in her expression. "I'm not the same man who let you walk away pregnant and alone. But I'm not asking you to trust that overnight. I'm asking you to give me a chance to prove it." The next morning brought Reed's first test of commitment versus convenience. His assistant Margaret called at 6 a.m. with the crisis that threatened to unravel everything. The Singapore investors were threatening to walk away from the merger unless Reed could provide immediate face-to-face reassurance about his commitment to the deal. "They're saying they have concerns about your reliability after yesterday's abrupt departure," Margaret explained, with the careful diplomacy of someone who'd spent years managing Reed's reputation. Mr. Chen specifically mentioned that they need a CEO who prioritizes business obligations over personal complications. Reed sat in his kitchen, still in his robe, watching Amara make pancakes, while Elias sat at the counter telling her about his dream, where they all lived in a castle made of books. The scene was so naturally domestic, so perfectly right, that the idea of leaving for an emergency business meeting felt like stepping backward into a life he no longer wanted. "What did you tell them?" Reed asked. "That you'd be in the office within the hour to address their concerns personally." Reed looked at Elias, whose head injury required monitoring for at least another day, then at Amara, who was learning to navigate the complicated dynamics of loving a child she barely knew but had never stopped thinking about. "Margaret, please, call Mr. Chen and arrange a video conference for this afternoon. If that's not sufficient to address their concerns, then perhaps we're not the right partners for each other." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "So with respect, this deal represents 18 months of negotiations and projected revenues in the billions. Are you certain you want to risk that for a family matter that could be handled by medical professionals?" Reed realized this was exactly the kind of choice that had defined his life for 6 years. Business obligations versus personal presence, financial success versus emotional connection. "Margaret, I'm going to say something I should have said years ago. My son is not a family matter. He's my family and he comes first." After ending the call, Reed found Amara and Elias looking at him with expressions of surprise and hope. "You're not going to work today?" Elias asked, as if the concept was so foreign it required clarification. "Not today. Today I'm going to learn how to make pancakes and hear more about that book castle dream." The day that followed was a revelation for Reed. Without the structure of meetings and deadlines, without the armor of professional obligations, he was forced to engage with the actual experience of fatherhood, messy, unpredictable, requiring patience rather than efficiency. Amara taught him how to really listen to Elias, how to follow a 6-year-old's conversational tangents instead of redirecting them toward educational objectives. She showed him how to read stories with different voices for each character, how to build elaborate structures with kitchen supplies, how to find magic in ordinary moments. "The secret," Amara explained as they worked together to build a fort, out of dining room chairs and expensive linens, is not trying to control the experience. Children don't need perfect activities. They need present adults who are genuinely interested in their imagination. Reed watched Elias transform throughout the day. The careful, polite child who typically moved through their home like a well-behaved guest gradually relaxed into natural exuberance. He laughed loudly, made messes without apologizing, asked endless questions without worrying about interrupting important conversations. "Daddy," Elias said during their impromptu living room picnic lunch, "why didn't we ever do this before?" Reed felt the question like an arrow to the heart. "Because I didn't know how, but I'm learning. Are you going to remember how when Miss Amara goes home?" Reed looked at Amara, who was watching this conversation with careful attention to both his words and Elias's reactions. What if Miss Amara didn't have to go home? What if this became her home too? Elias's face lit up with pure joy. Really? She could stay forever. That would be up to her, Reed said, his eyes never leaving Amara's face. It would mean we'd all have to learn how to be a family together. That's not always easy. But it would be worth it, Elias said, with the absolute certainty only children possess about matters of the heart. Reed realized his son was right. Whatever complications came with rebuilding their family, whatever challenges they'd face integrating their different backgrounds and expectations, it would be worth it to see. Elias this happy, this secure, this completely himself. At 2:47 a.m., Elias's screams shattered the carefully maintained peace of Reed's penthouse. Not the controlled crying of a child seeking attention, but the primal terror of someone drowning in trauma that his developing mind couldn't process. Reed bolted from his bedroom and ran toward Elias's room, his heart hammering against his ribs. He found Amara already there, sitting on the edge of their son's bed, trying to wake him from a nightmare that seemed to have physical claws. "No, don't make her go away again. Please don't make her go away." Elias thrashed in his bed, still caught between sleep and waking, fighting against dream demons that Reed realized were probably memories of their family's actual history. "Elias, wake up, sweetheart. You're safe. We're both here." But when Elias finally opened his eyes, his gaze went immediately to Reed, with an expression of accusation that made Reed's chest feel like it was caving in. "You're going to make her leave, aren't you? You're going to send Miss Amara away like you did before?" Reed felt the full weight of his past choices crashing down on him. His 6-year-old son had been carrying the fear of abandonment, the knowledge that the adults he loved most could disappear without warning, the terrible understanding that love could be taken away based on decisions he had no power to influence. "Elias, I promise you, you promised before." Elias's voice broke with the kind of anguish that should never come from someone so small. "Mrs. Patterson told me. She said I used to have a mommy who lived with us, but Daddy decided it was better if she went away." Reed stared at his son, realizing that Mrs. Patterson, trying to answer a child's questions about his family history, had inadvertently revealed the truth Reed had tried so hard to hide. "She told me that sometimes daddies have to make hard choices about what's best for their little boys. But I don't want what's best. I want my mommy." Elias collapsed against Amara, sobbing with the intensity of 6 years of suppressed grief for a relationship he'd been denied before he was old enough to understand what he was losing. "I'm here now, baby," Amara whispered, holding him tight. "I'm here and I'm not going anywhere. Promise. Promise you won't let Daddy send you away again?" Amara looked at Reed over their son's head, her eyes reflecting the same fear Elias was expressing, because they both knew that promises about staying required Reed's cooperation, and Reed had broken such promises before. "I promise I will fight to stay with you," Amara said carefully. "But some things are bigger than what I want. Some things depend on other people making different choices than they made before." Reed realized this was his moment of truth, not in some distant future, when he'd had time to prepare and plan, but right now with his son falling apart in his mother's arms, asking for the one thing Reed had the power to give or withhold. "Elias, look at me." His son turned, his face streaked with tears and desperate hope. "I made a terrible mistake 6 years ago. I let fear make my decisions instead of love. I sent your mother away, not because it was best for you, but because I was scared of what other people would think. But you won't do it again?" Reed knelt beside the bed, putting himself at his son's eye level for this most important conversation of both their lives. "I will never ever send your mother away again. Whatever happens, whatever problems we have to solve, whatever people say about our family, we're going to solve them together. All 3 of us. Even if grandmother says mean things about Miss Amara again." Reed's blood ran cold. "What do you know about grandmother saying mean things? I heard her on the phone with Mrs. Patterson last year. She said Miss Amara was unsuitable and that I was better off without complications. I didn't know what that meant, but it sounded like she didn't want me to have a mommy." Reed realized that his family's prejudices had been poisoning his son's understanding of love, family, and his own worth for years. Elias had been carrying the burden of knowing that some of the adults in his life thought his mother, and by extension part of himself, was somehow inadequate or unwelcome. "Elias, listen to me very carefully. Your mother is not a complication. She's not unsuitable. She's the woman who carried you before you were born, who loved you before she ever saw your face, who never stopped hoping she'd get to be your mommy." Then, why did you make her leave? Because I was afraid. Afraid that loving her and letting her love us would be too difficult, too complicated, too different from what my family expected. But I was wrong about everything except one thing. She loves you more than anything in the world. Reed looked at Amara, seeing tears streaming down her face as she held their son. And I love both of you more than I ever thought possible. More than my business. More than my reputation. More than the approval of people who don't understand what real family means. So we can be a real family? With a mommy and a daddy who both live here? If your mother will give us that chance, yes. Reed looked at Amara, his heart completely exposed. Will you? Will you give us the chance to be the family we should have? Been from the beginning. Amara looked between Reed and Elias, seeing the hope and fear in both their faces, understanding that her answer would shape all their futures. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I want to try. The next morning brought the first real test of Reed's commitment to putting family before business obligations. Virginia McAllister arrived at the penthouse unannounced at 8 a.m., sweeping through the private elevator with the imperial authority of someone accustomed to immediate compliance with her wishes. Reed was in the kitchen with Amara and Elias, attempting to make French toast under Amara's patient instruction, when his mother's voice cut through their domestic peace like a blade. Reed. Alexander McAllister, we need to discuss this situation immediately. Reed felt Elias tense beside him, his son's natural joy immediately replaced by the careful, guarded behavior he exhibited around his grandmother. Amara quietly moved to stand protectively near Elias, recognizing a threat even though they hadn't been formally introduced. Mother, Reed said carefully, I'd like you to meet Amara Fields. Amara, this is my mother, Virginia McAllister. Virginia's gaze swept over Amara with the dismissive assessment of someone evaluating an unwelcome intrusion. Ms. Fields, I understand you've been providing medical care for Elias. I've been helping with his recovery, yes. How professional of you. I'm sure the hospital appreciates volunteers who go above and beyond their assigned duties. Reed heard the condescension in his mother's tone and felt his protective instincts sharpen. Amara is not just a volunteer, Mother. She's Elias's mother. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I see. And you thought it appropriate to allow this person back into your home without consulting the family? Without considering the implications for Elias's stability? Grandmother, Elias said quietly, his small voice carrying surprising strength. Miss Amara is my mommy. She takes care of me and makes me feel safe. Virginia looked down at her grandson with an expression that managed to be simultaneously loving and disapproving. Darling boy, I know this situation is confusing for you, but sometimes adults have to make difficult decisions about what's truly best for children, even when those decisions are temporarily upsetting. Reed watched his mother attempt to manipulate his son's emotions, using the same tactics she'd employed on Reed for 40 years, and felt something snap inside his chest. Mother, stop right there! Virginia looked surprised by the steel in Reed's voice. You will not manipulate my son's emotions to support your prejudices. You will not make him feel guilty for loving his mother, and you will not use my love for you as leverage to destroy my family again. Reed, please lower your voice. You're frightening the child. Reed looked at Elias, who was watching this confrontation with wide eyes, but didn't look frightened. He looked hopeful, as if he was finally seeing his father stand up for something that mattered. What's frightening is that you think loving someone who doesn't fit your narrow definition of acceptable is somehow damaging to a child. What's frightening is that you'd rather see your grandson grow up without his mother than admit that your social prejudices are more important to you than his happiness. Virginia drew herself up to her full height, preparing to deploy the ultimate weapon in her arsenal of control. Reed, if you insist on pursuing this relationship, there will be consequences. The board of directors, the family foundation, your position in society. All of it depends on maintaining appropriate standards. Then let it all go, Reed said, his voice steady with conviction he hadn't felt 6 years ago. Let the board question my judgment. Let society gossip about my choices. Let the foundation find someone else to manage their charity work. None of it matters more than giving my son the family he deserves. You're willing to throw away everything your father built? Everything our family represents? Reed looked at Elias, who was holding Amara's hand and watching his father choose between legacy and love in real time. What our family represents, Mother, is the belief that love should be conditional on social status, that children are possessions to be managed rather than people to be cherished, that reputation matters more than relationships. If that's my father's legacy, then yes, I'm throwing it away. Virginia's composure cracked for the first time Reed could remember. You're making a mistake that will haunt you for the rest of your life. The mistake that haunts me is the one I made 6 years ago when I let you convince me that Amara wasn't good enough for our family. The mistake is that I waited this long to correct it. Reed moved to stand beside Amara and Elias, physically placing himself between his mother and his chosen family. Amara and Elias are my family now. They're who I'm choosing. If you can't accept that choice, if you can't treat them with respect and love, then you're choosing not to be part of our lives. Virginia stared at her son, perhaps recognizing for the first time that the boy she'd molded and controlled had become a man capable of choosing love over fear. I'll be in touch when you come to your senses, she said coldly. But Reed heard the uncertainty in her voice. After she left, the kitchen felt lighter, as if a suffocating weight had been lifted from all of them. Daddy, Elias said quietly, you really going to choose us over grandmother? Reed knelt down to his son's level, taking small hands in his own. Elias, I want you to understand something very important. Choosing love is never wrong. Choosing to protect the people you care about is never wrong. And choosing to build a family based on kindness instead of rules is never wrong. Even if it makes other people angry? Especially then, the people who get angry when you choose love over their expectations are showing you that their love has conditions. Real love, the kind your mother has for you, the kind I'm learning to have for both of you, doesn't have conditions. Reed looked at Amara, seeing tears in her eyes and something that might have been pride. We're going to face more challenges, more people who don't understand or approve of our family. But we're going to face them together, all three of us, as a real family. For the first time in 6 years, Reed felt like he was exactly where he belonged. 3 days later, Reed's choice to prioritize family over business obligations exploded into public scrutiny when a gossip blogger published photos of him leaving a children's museum with Amara and Elias, accompanied by a breathlessly speculative article titled, "Tech Mogul's Secret Baby Mama Revealed." The story was a masterclass in sensationalism mixed with just enough truth to be legally defensible. It identified Amara as a community health worker who had mysteriously appeared in Reed's life at the same time his business behavior became erratic and unreliable. The article speculated about everything from secret payoffs to hostile takeovers of Reed's emotional state. Reed discovered the media storm when his phone started ringing at 6 a.m. with calls from reporters, business associates, and board members, demanding explanations for what the Wall Street Journal was now calling McAllister's midlife crisis. "Sir," Margaret's voice was tight with stress, "we have 17 interview requests, 4 different gossip shows wanting statements, and the board of directors has called an emergency meeting for this afternoon." Reed looked across the breakfast table at Amara, who was reading the online coverage on her tablet with an expression of growing horror. "They're making me sound like some kind of gold digger who seduced you away from your responsibilities," she said quietly. "One article claims I'm a working-class manipulator who spotted a vulnerable single father and moved in for the kill." Elias looked up from his cereal, confused by the tension that had suddenly filled their peaceful morning routine. "Are the newspapers talking about us?" "Some people are very interested in our family," Reed said carefully, trying to find age-appropriate language for explaining media invasion of privacy. "Are they saying bad things about Miss Amara?" Reed realized there was no way to shield his son from the reality that some people would always disapprove of their family, that choosing love over convention came with public consequences. "Some people don't understand why Daddy and Miss Amara love each other. They think it's unusual, so they're writing stories about us." "But we know the real story," Elias said, with 6-year-old logic. "We know Miss Amara is my mommy, and she loves me, and you love both of us. Why don't we just tell everyone the real story? Reed looked at his son's innocent face and realized that sometimes the simplest solutions were also the bravest ones. You know what, Elias? That's exactly what we should do. Instead of hiding from the media attention or trying to control the narrative through corporate spin, Reed decided to do something unprecedented in his business career. Tell the complete truth publicly and let the consequences fall where they might. That afternoon, instead of attending the emergency board meeting, Reed organized a press conference in the lobby of his building. With Amara beside him and Elias holding both their hands, he faced a room full of reporters and photographers who had expected defensive explanations or damage control. 6 years ago, Reed began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to reveal, I made the worst decision of my life. When the woman I loved told me she was pregnant with my child, I chose fear over courage, social expectations over family loyalty, and other people's approval over my own heart. Camera flashes erupted as reporters realized this wasn't going to be a standard corporate statement. I allowed Amara Fields to leave my life, not because she was unsuitable to be my partner or Elias's mother, but because I was too weak to defend our relationship against people who thought love should be limited by race, class, and social convention. Reed looked down at Elias, who was listening with the serious attention he gave to all important adult conversations. For 6 years, my son grew up without his mother, not because she chose to leave, but because I chose not to fight for her. That was my failure, my cowardice, and my responsibility. Mr. McAllister, a reporter called out, are you saying you've been deliberately separated from your child's mother this entire time? I'm saying I used money and legal power to ensure that Amara couldn't be part of Elias's life, even though she never stopped loving him and wanting to be his mother. I convinced myself I was protecting him from complications, but I was actually depriving him of the unconditional love he deserved. Reed felt Amara squeeze his hand, lending him strength for the most important speech of his life. Yesterday, my mother threatened to use family money and business connections to force me to choose between my company and my family. She offered me wealth, status, and social acceptance in exchange for sending Amara away again. And what did you choose? Another reporter asked. Reed looked directly into the cameras, knowing that this moment would define not just his public reputation, but his son's understanding of what courage looked like. I chose love. I chose the woman who never stopped caring about our child. I chose to be the father Elias always needed instead of the businessman other people expected me to be. And I chose to build a family based on love instead of fear. Mr. McAllister, what about the impact on your business interests? If my business partners can't respect my choices as a father, then they're not partners I want. If my social circle can't accept the woman I love and the family we're building together, then it's not a circle I need to be part of. Reed knelt down to Elias's level, including his son in this public declaration of family loyalty. Elias, is there anything you want to tell everyone about our family? His son looked out at the room full of adults with cameras and recording equipment, then spoke with the clarity that comes from knowing you're completely loved. Miss Amara is my mommy, and she makes the best pancakes, and she knows how to make scary things not scary anymore. And my daddy is learning how to be the best daddy ever, and we're happy. The simplicity and honesty of Elias's statement cut through all the speculation and sensationalism, reducing the story to its essential truth: a family choosing to be together, despite obstacles. That evening, watching the news coverage of their press conference, Reed realized they'd accomplished something unprecedented. Instead of being victims of media speculation, they'd controlled their own narrative. Instead of hiding from public judgment, they'd invited it while standing united as a family. Do you regret it? Amara asked as they watched commentators debate their choices on cable news. I regret waiting 6 years to do it, Reed replied. But no, I don't regret choosing you. I don't regret choosing us. The emergency board meeting Reed had skipped convened without him, but its consequences arrived at his penthouse the next morning in the form of Gerald Hartman, his longtime attorney and family friend, carrying documents that would force Reed to confront the true cost of choosing love over legacy. "Reed, we need to discuss the board's decision," Gerald said, settling into one of the leather chairs in Reed's study, while Amara and Elias worked on a puzzle in the living room. Reed poured coffee for both of them, noting how different this felt from every other business crisis he'd navigated. Usually his full attention would be focused on protecting his interests, calculating responses, managing outcomes. Now, part of his mind remained with his family, aware of Elias's laughter filtering. Through the closed door, "What's their position?" Gerald opened his briefcase with the careful precision of someone delivering bad news to a client he genuinely cared about. "They're questioning your judgment, Reed. Yesterday's press conference, the Singapore deal falling through, the media coverage. They're saying you've become a liability to the company's reputation and stock price. And they're prepared to offer you a buyout. Generous terms, full value for your shares, plus a substantial severance package. In exchange, you'd resign as CEO and divest completely from McAllister Industries." Reed felt a strange sense of relief, rather than the panic he would have expected. "So they want to force me out. They want to give you an exit strategy that preserves everyone's dignity. You could walk away with enough money to never work again, pursue whatever personal interest you choose, raise your family without the pressures of corporate leadership. And if I refuse?" Gerald's expression grew more serious. "Then they'll initiate proceedings to remove you for cause. They'll argue that your personal decisions have compromised your ability to fulfill your fiduciary responsibilities. It would be messy, public, and potentially damaging to your long-term financial security." Reed walked to the window overlooking Central Park, watching families enjoy Saturday morning together. Parents pushing strollers, children feeding ducks, the ordinary magic of people who'd chosen presence over productivity. "Gerald, can I ask you something honestly?" "Of course. Do you think I've lost my mind? Do you think I'm throwing away everything sensible for some romantic fantasy?" Gerald was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "Reed, I've known you for 15 years. I've watched you build an empire through pure determination and strategic brilliance. You've been one of the most focused, driven executives I've ever worked with. But I've also watched you become increasingly isolated, increasingly disconnected from anything that brought you genuine joy. Your success was impressive, but it wasn't making you happy." Gerald looked toward the living room where Amara was teaching. Elias some kind of clapping game, both of them dissolving into giggles when they lost the rhythm. "In the past week, you've seemed more relaxed, more present, more genuinely content than I've seen you in years. If that's the result of losing your mind, then maybe sanity is overrated." Reed realized that his oldest business advisor was giving him permission to choose happiness over ambition, relationship over reputation. "What would you do, Gerald, if you were in my position?" "I'd ask myself which choice I'd regret more, losing the company I built or losing the family I'd just found." That evening, Reed gathered Amara and Elias in the living room for a family meeting. The first time he'd ever approached a major life decision as something to be discussed rather than dictated. "I need to tell you both about some choices we have to make together," Reed began, sitting on the floor where Elias was building a Lego castle. "The people who run my company with me don't approve of our family. They think I should be focused only on business, not on being a daddy or loving your mommy." Elias looked up from his construction project with the serious expression he wore when processing complicated adult information. "What do they want you to do?" "They want me to choose between keeping my company and keeping our family together." "That's silly," Elias said with 6-year-old logic. "Companies are just buildings and meetings. Families are people who love each other." Reed marveled at his son's clarity about what mattered most. "You're absolutely right, but choosing family might mean we have less money, a smaller house, fewer expensive things." Elias considered this gravely. "Would we still have pancakes for breakfast?" "Yes." "Would Miss Amara still be my mummy?" "Yes." "Would you still be my daddy?" "Always." "Then we have everything we need." Reed looked at Amara, who had tears in her eyes, as she watched their son effortlessly prioritize love over luxury. "What about you?" Reed asked her. Are you prepared for what it might mean to build a life with someone who's choosing principle over profit? Amara moved to sit beside them on the floor, joining their impromptu family circle. Reed, 6 years. You chose money and status over love, and it broke all our hearts. If you're finally ready to choose love over everything else, then yes, I'm prepared for whatever that means. Even if it means starting over. Even if it means building something completely different than the life I had planned. Especially then. The best families aren't built on money, Reed. They're built on presence, commitment, and the willingness to show up for each other every single day. Reed looked at his small family. His brilliant son who understood priorities with crystalline clarity. The woman whose love had survived 6 years of separation and hurt. The possibility of building something real together. And realized the choice was simpler than he'd thought. Then let's choose love. Let's choose each other. Let's choose to build the family we should have been from the beginning. Reed has made his choice to prioritize family over business success, but now faces the ultimate test. Can he actually follow through when the consequences become real? The rising action has built to a crescendo where love must prove itself stronger than a lifetime of conditioning towards status and success. Reed signed the resignation papers at 9 a.m. on Monday morning, in the same conference room where he'd walked away from the Singapore merger to rush to his son's hospital bedside. The irony wasn't lost on him. The room that had witnessed the beginning of his transformation was now witnessing the end of the career that had defined him for 20 years. Gerald Hartman sat across from him, overseeing the legal transfer that would sever Reed's connection to McAllister Industries permanently. The buyout terms were generous, more money than most people could spend in several lifetimes, but Reed felt oddly empty as he signed away his empire. "Second thoughts?" Gerald asked, noting Reed's hesitation as the pen hovered over the final signature line. "No, just grief, I think. This company was my identity for so long that letting it go feels like losing a part of myself. Or maybe it feels like finding a part of yourself you'd forgotten existed," Gerald suggested gently. "The part that built this company because you wanted to create something meaningful, not because you wanted to prove your worth to people who would never be satisfied." Reed signed his name with finality, officially ending his reign as CEO of the empire he'd built from nothing. "What happens now?" Gerald asked. "Now I go home to my family and figure out how to be the father and partner they deserve, instead of the businessman everyone expected me to be." But as Reed prepared to leave the building that had been his second home for 2 decades, his assistant Margaret intercepted him with news that would test his newfound priorities in ways he hadn't anticipated. "Mr. McAllister, I've been monitoring the news coverage since your press conference, and there's something you need to know." Reed's stomach tightened. "What now?" Someone leaked Amara's background to the tabloids. Her family history, her financial struggles, details about the legal agreements from 6 years ago. They're painting a very unflattering picture. Margaret handed him a tablet, displaying the morning's gossip headlines. "Gold Digger's Long Game." Revealed. How a nurse played the ultimate con. McAllister fortune at risk from master manipulator. Reed scanned the articles with growing horror. Whoever had provided the information knew intimate details about Amara's life. Her childhood in foster care, her student loan debt from nursing school, the exact amount of the settlement he'd provided. When she was pregnant, the coverage made her sound calculating and mercenary, a woman who'd planned for years to seduce him into giving up his fortune. "This is character assassination," Reed said grimly. "It gets worse. Someone called Child Protective Services with concerns about Elias's welfare. They're claiming that his sudden attachment to a previously unknown mother figure might indicate emotional manipulation or instability in the home environment." Reed felt the floor drop out from under him. "They're questioning our fitness as parents. A caseworker will be conducting a home visit this afternoon to assess the situation. It's probably routine, but given the media attention." Reed realized that choosing love over business hadn't just cost him his career. It had potentially put his son at risk. Someone was using the legal system to weaponize his family's happiness against them. Who would do this? Who has access to this kind of detailed information about our private lives? Margaret's expression was grim. Someone with significant resources and connections, someone who wants to punish you for your choices by destroying the family you chose to protect. Reed didn't need to ask who. There was only one person with both, the motivation and the means to orchestrate this kind of comprehensive attack on their lives: his mother. Reed arrived home to find Amara in their bedroom, packing clothes into the same small suitcase she'd brought when this had all started. Her movements were efficient but heartbroken, like someone who'd hoped for a different ending but wasn't surprised by disappointment. "You saw the news," Reed said, not really a question. "I saw enough." Amara's voice was steady, but Reed could see the devastation in her posture. "Reed, I can't let this destroy Elias's life. I can't let them use my presence to hurt him. So you're leaving. I'm protecting him, and you. This kind of scrutiny, these accusations about my motives, it's exactly what your mother warned would happen 6 years ago." Reed sat on the edge of the bed, watching the woman he loved prepare to sacrifice herself again for their son's welfare. "Amara, you can't seriously believe those articles. You can't think I believe them. It doesn't matter what we believe. It matters what Child Protective Services believes, what judges believe, what the public believes. And right now they're being told that I'm a gold digger who manipulated you into abandoning your responsibilities for some elaborate financial scheme." Reed took her hands, stilling her packing. "Then we fight it. We tell the truth. We show them what our family actually looks like. With what credibility? I'm a community health worker with student debt, going up against one of the most powerful families in New York. They have lawyers, investigators, media connections. I have good intentions and a nursing degree." Before Reed could respond, their doorbell rang. Through the intercom system, they could hear Elias answering the door with the polite formality he'd been taught for handling visitors. "Daddy, there's a lady here who says she needs to talk to our family about important stuff." Reed and Amara exchanged glances. The Child Protective Services visit had arrived ahead of schedule. The caseworker, Susan Chen, was a middle-aged woman, with kind eyes and the weary competence of someone who'd seen every possible family configuration. She spent the next 2 hours observing their interactions, asking gentle but probing questions, and documenting everything from their living arrangements to Elias's emotional state. "Elias," she said, sitting at his level in the living room, while Reed and Amara watched anxiously. "Can you tell me about your family? I have a daddy who used to be really busy, but now he makes pancakes with me. And I have a mommy who tells the best stories and knows how to make scared feelings go away. And we live together and take care of each other. How long has your mommy been living here?" "Just a few days, but I knew about her before. I found pictures and learned her name and wished she could come home. And then she did." Susan made notes, her expression carefully neutral. "And how do you feel about that?" "Happy, really, really happy, like when you've been holding your breath underwater and then you get to breathe again." Reed felt his chest tighten at his son's description of relief, understanding that Elias had been emotionally suffocating without his mother and was only now learning to breathe freely. "Elias, has anyone ever made you feel unsafe or scared since your mummy came to live here?" "No, I feel safer than I ever did before, because now if something bad happens, I have both my mummy and my daddy to help me." After Susan interviewed each of them separately, she gathered them in the living room for her preliminary assessment. "I want to be clear about something," she began, consulting her notes. "The concerns that were raised about this household don't match what I'm observing. Elias appears well cared for, emotionally secure, and genuinely happy. His attachment to Miss Field seems natural and healthy, not forced or manipulative." Reed felt some of his tension ease. "However," Susan continued, "there are still questions about the timing and circumstances of Miss Field's re-entry into Elias's life. The fact that she had no previous contact with him, combined with the significant media attention, creates complications that I need to investigate further." "What does that mean?" Amara asked. "It means I'll be filing a report recommending continued monitoring for the next 6 months. Monthly check-ins, psychological evaluation for Elias to ensure his adjustment is healthy, and documentation of the family's stability during this transition period." Reed realized they were being placed under official surveillance, their families' legitimacy questioned by the state because someone had weaponized the legal system against them. "Ms. Chen," Reed said carefully, "can you tell us who filed the initial complaint?" "I'm not at liberty to reveal that information, but I will say that it came through official channels and included very detailed allegations that required investigation." After Susan left, Reed, Amara, and Elias sat together on the couch, processing the reality that their happiness was now subject to governmental oversight. "Daddy," Elias said quietly, "are they going to make Miss Amara go away again?" Reed looked at his son's worried face and made a decision that would change everything. "No, buddy. Nobody is going to make your mommy go away. Not the government, not the newspapers, not even grandmother. We're going to fight for our family and we're going to win." "How?" Amara asked. "Reed, we're up against forces that have unlimited resources and no moral boundaries. How do we fight that?" Reed thought about the empire he'd just given up, the reputation he'd sacrificed, the comfortable life he'd abandoned for the chance to love without conditions. "We fight it by being better than they are, by showing everyone what real family looks like, by refusing to be ashamed of choosing love over convenience." Reed stood up, feeling more determined than he had since this whole crisis began, and we start by going on the offensive instead of just defending ourselves. Reed's counteroffensive began with a phone call to his mother at 6 a.m. the next morning, early enough to catch her before she'd had time to prepare her usual verbal armor, direct enough to cut through decades of manipulation and control. "Mother, we need to talk. And before you start with denials or justifications, you should know that I have investigators tracing the leak of Amara's personal information back to its source." Virginia's silence on the other end of the line was telling. "Reed, I don't know what you think you've discovered, but I think I've discovered that you're willing to use Child Protective Services as a weapon against your own grandchild to punish me for choosing love over your approval. I think I've discovered that you'd rather see Elias in emotional distress than admit you were wrong about his mother. That child was perfectly fine before that woman manipulated her way back into your lives." Reed felt his anger crystallize into something cold and purposeful. "Mother, I'm going to say this once, and I want you to listen very carefully. If you continue to interfere with my family, if you continue to try to separate Elias from his mother, if you persist in this campaign of harassment and character assassination, I will go public with everything." "Everything?" "The real reason you opposed my relationship with Amara 6 years ago, the things you said about mixed-race children and their place in society, the financial pressure you used to force me to abandon the woman I loved when she was pregnant with your grandchild." Virginia's breathing became audible through the phone. "You wouldn't dare. The damage to the family reputation would be exactly what you deserve. Mother, you've spent 40 years using shame and social pressure to control me. You convinced me that love should be conditional on other people's approval, that family should be built on status instead of affection." Reed looked through the bedroom, a doorway where he could see Amara reading to Elias in the living room, both of them curled together on the couch, like puzzle pieces that had finally found their proper places. "But I'm not that man anymore. I'm not afraid of public opinion, and I'm not afraid of losing your approval. The only thing I'm afraid of is failing to protect the people I love. Reed, please, think about what you're risking. The foundation, the charitable work, the influence our family has used to help others, has been built on a foundation of prejudice and emotional manipulation. If it can't survive being associated with genuine love and authentic family connection, then maybe it doesn't deserve to survive." Reed ended the call and immediately contacted Gerald Hartman with instructions to prepare a comprehensive legal response to any further interference in his family's life. But the real breakthrough came later that morning when Amara suggested something that Reed would never have considered in his previous life. Instead of fighting their critics privately, why not invite public scrutiny of their actual daily life? "What do you mean?" Reed asked. "I mean we stop hiding. We stop acting like we're ashamed of our family. We show people what we're actually like when we're just being ourselves." Amara's proposal was radical in its simplicity. They would document their family life honestly and share it publicly, not through careful media management, but through genuine transparency. They started with social media, Amara creating accounts. That showed their morning routines, their impromptu dance parties in the kitchen, Reed learning to braid Elias's hair for school, all three of them working together to plant a garden on their terrace. But the real game changer was when Elias suggested they invite the news cameras into their home. "If people think we're pretending to be a happy family," he said with 6-year-old logic, "why don't we show them that we're really a happy family?" So they did. Reed arranged for a documentary crew to spend a week with them, capturing not the polished perfection of wealth, but the authentic messiness of love. Viewers saw Reed burning breakfast while trying to surprise Amara, Elias teaching both his parents a complex clapping game, the three of them having a minor disagreement about bedtime that was resolved with patience and compromise rather than authority and submission. Most importantly, they showed Elias being completely unself-consciously himself, a confident, joyful child who felt secure enough to express his needs, his fears, and his excitement without worrying about adult approval. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. Instead of seeing a gold digger and her marks, people saw a family that felt real, genuine, worth protecting. Letters began arriving at their apartment, hundreds of them from other mixed-race families, single parents, children who'd grown up without one biological parent. People shared their own stories of choosing love over convenience, of building families that didn't fit traditional molds, but worked because they were based on authentic care rather than social expectation. "Look at this one," Amara said, reading from a letter that had arrived that morning. It's from a woman in Ohio whose white husband adopted her black daughter from a previous relationship. She says watching our family gave her courage to stop apologizing for their happiness. Reed realized they'd inadvertently become symbols of something larger than their personal story. They represented the possibility that love could overcome, prejudice that families could be built on choice rather than chance, that happiness was worth fighting for, even when the fight was public and painful. But the real validation came from an unexpected source. Susan Chen, the Child Protective Services caseworker, called to inform them that the investigation had been closed. "The concerns that prompted our involvement have been thoroughly investigated and found to be without merit," she told them. "In fact, Elias appears to be thriving in ways that suggest this family arrangement is exceptionally beneficial to his development." "What changed?" Reed asked. "Honestly, the public documentation of your family life provided more insight into your actual dynamics than months of formal evaluation could have achieved. It's clear that Elias is loved, secure, and genuinely happy. That's all we really care about." The final test of Reed's transformation came not from external pressure, but from an internal crisis that threatened to unravel everything they'd built together. It started with a phone call from Gerald Hartman on a quiet Sunday morning, while Reed, Amara and Elias were making pancakes and planning a trip to the zoo. "Reed, I have news that's going to complicate your life in ways you haven't anticipated." Reed stepped onto the terrace for privacy, leaving Amara and Elias to continue their breakfast preparations. "What is it, Gerald? The board's decision to force you out has backfired spectacularly. The company's stock price has dropped 30% since your resignation. 3 major clients have terminated their contracts, citing concerns about leadership stability. The Singapore investors have not only walked away, but are actively discouraging others from doing business with McAllister Industries." Reed felt a strange mixture of vindication and regret. "So they're struggling without me. More than struggling. They're facing potential bankruptcy within 6 months unless they can find a way to restore investor confidence. And Reed, they want you back." Reed stared out over Central Park, watching families enjoy Sunday morning together. Parents pushing strollers, children feeding ducks, the ordinary magic of people who'd chosen presence over productivity. "What exactly are they offering?" "Full reinstatement as CEO, increased compensation, complete autonomy over company direction, and public acknowledgement that forcing you out was an error in judgment." Reed's chest tightened. This was everything he'd worked 20 years to achieve: complete control of his empire, vindication of his leadership, the kind of professional success that most people could only dream about. "There's more," Gerald continued. They're also offering to establish the Amara Fields Foundation for Community Health as a subsidiary of McAllister Industries. $50 million in initial funding, with Amara as executive director and you as chairman of the board. Reed felt the offer's seductive pull. He could have everything: his company, his reputation, and his family. Amara would have the resources to expand her community health work beyond anything she'd imagined. Elias would grow up with both financial security and loving parents. What's the catch, Gerald? No catch, they're genuinely desperate. Your public transformation from ruthless businessman to devoted family man has actually enhanced your reputation rather than damaged it. People trust you more now, not less. Reed realized this was the ultimate test of everything he'd learned about what mattered most. The universe was offering him the chance to have both love and legacy, family and fortune, authentic relationships, and professional achievement. I need to discuss this with Amara, Reed said. Of course. But Reed, don't take too long to decide. They need an answer by tomorrow morning. Reed returned to the kitchen where Amara and Elias were engaged in a spirited debate about whether chocolate chips belonged in pancakes or should be saved for dessert. Both, Elias declared. Chocolate chip pancakes for breakfast and chocolate chip cookies for dessert. A man after my own heart, Amara laughed, kissing the top of his head. Reed watched this interaction, so natural, so filled with joy, and realized he was about to potentially disrupt it with complications and choices. Amara, I need to talk to you about something important. She must have heard something in his tone, because her expression shifted to concern. Elias, sweetheart, why don't you go wash up while Daddy and I talk for a few minutes? After their son left, Reed explained the offer in detail, watching Amara's face cycle through surprise, excitement, and finally something that looked like sadness. It's everything you worked for, she said quietly. Everything you gave up for us. It's an opportunity, but only if it's what we want as a family. Amara was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. Reed, 6 months ago, you chose your company over our family. Now you have the chance to have both. But I need to ask you something honestly. If you go back to being CEO, if you're running a $50 billion empire again, will you still be the man who makes pancakes on Sunday morning? Reed realized this was the question that mattered most. Not whether he could handle the professional responsibilities, but whether he could maintain the personal growth that had made their family possible. I don't know, he admitted. I want to believe I can balance both, but I've never been good at moderation. I've always been all or nothing. Then maybe the question isn't whether you can balance both. Maybe the question is which choice you'd regret more. That evening, Reed made a decision that surprised even himself. He called Gerald and declined the offer, not because he didn't want professional success, but because he'd finally learned to define success differently. Success wasn't about building the biggest empire or accumulating the most wealth. It was about being present for the people you loved, about creating a family where everyone felt valued and secure. Are you sure, Reed? This kind of opportunity won't come again. I'm sure, Gerald, I spent 20 years building a company that could function without me for a week. I'm not going to spend the next 20 years missing my son's childhood or taking my relationship with Amara for granted. Reed hung up the phone and returned to the living room where Amara and Elias were building an elaborate blanket fort, their laughter filling the space with warmth. Did you choose us again, Daddy? Elias asked, looking up from his architectural project. I chose us, Reed confirmed, settling down beside them to help with construction. I'll always choose us. Reed has passed the ultimate test, choosing family over fortune, even when he could have had both. Now the challenge shifts from making the right choice to living with that choice, building a life where love truly does prove more valuable than legacy. 3 months after declining the CEO position, Reed stood in the empty storefront that would become the Amara Fields Community Health Center. Gone were the $1,000 suits, replaced by jeans and work shirts. Gone were 18-hour workdays, replaced by schedules that prioritized Elias's school pickup and family dinners. Reed, help me figure out where the pediatric tables should go, Amara called from across the space. I was thinking here, She gestured toward large windows overlooking a small park. Natural light, view of the playground, something cheerful for scared kids. Reed marveled at how Amara approached every decision through the lens of what would make people feel safer, more valued. It was the opposite of his previous philosophy, focused on efficiency and profitability. Daddy, Miss Rosa taught me how to say bandage in Spanish. Elias burst through the door, followed by Rosa Martinez, their volunteer coordinator. At 7, Elias had become the unofficial mascot, charming donors with his enthusiasm for helping make sick people feel better. That's wonderful, buddy. What else did you learn? That lots of kids don't have doctors like I do, and that's not fair. But Miss Rosa says we're going to help fix that. Reed watched his son process social justice with childhood clarity. Where adults saw systemic problems, Elias saw simple unfairness to be corrected through kindness. Are we still going to have enough money for ice cream and zoo trips? Elias asked practically. Reed knelt to his son's level. We have enough for everything that matters, buddy. We might not have a private jet, but we have each other. We might not live in the biggest apartment, but our new home has a yard where you can play. Plus, Elias added with 7-year-old wisdom, it's more fun to help people than to just buy things for ourselves. That evening, walking home from construction, Reed reflected on how his definition of success had changed. Instead of deals closed or profits generated, he measured achievement in moments of family connection and community progress. Reed, Amara said as they walked, do you ever miss the excitement of running a major corporation? I miss the sense of accomplishment, he admitted, but I don't miss the isolation or constant anxiety, and I definitely don't miss achieving everything I thought I wanted, only to discover it couldn't fill the hole where authentic relationships should have been. Reed squeezed both their hands. Besides, I'm still solving complex problems. They're just different. How to provide healthcare to underserved communities, how to be present for my son's childhood, how to love my wife properly. And how are you doing with those problems? Amara smiled. Still learning, but I've got excellent teachers. Opening day dawned grey and drizzly, but by 8 a.m. a line of families stretched around the block. Parents holding sleeping infants, elderly residents who'd walk despite arthritis, teenagers bringing younger siblings for checkups they couldn't otherwise afford. Reed stood beside Amara at reception, both wearing scrubs with the center's logo, a tree with deep roots and wide branches, symbolizing community healthcare. His role had evolved from financial backer to general coordinator. Mrs. Chen, how can we help you today? Amara asked the first patient. My grandson has been coughing for 3 weeks. His mother works 2 jobs and can't afford to miss time for doctor visits. Reed watched Amara kneel to the 7-year-old's level, immediately putting him at ease despite the clinical setting. Throughout the morning, Reed was amazed by the stories. Families rationing medications, parents treating serious conditions. With home remedies, children who'd never had basic preventive care because their families fell between qualifying for assistance and affording private insurance. Mr. Reed, called Carmen Santos, their volunteer translator. Can you help with room 3? The father only speaks Spanish. Reed had been taking Spanish lessons, recognizing that serving their community required cultural competence. Señor Rodríguez, su hija necesita tomar esta medicina 2 veces cada día, he said carefully. Gracias, señor. Es muy importante tener doctores que nos entienden. By lunchtime, they'd seen 43 patients, provided immunizations for 12 children, diagnosed 3 cases of strep throat, and connected 5 families with social services. But the most meaningful moment came when Elias arrived after school, carrying a drawing for the children's area. I drew all of us, he announced. That's Mommy helping sick kids, that's Daddy making sure everyone gets medicine, and that's me being a helper too. Reed studied the stick figures with huge smiles, holding hands around a building with a red cross. Elias had drawn himself as an integral part of their mission, not as a child being cared for while adults did important work. He's going to grow up to be an extraordinary person, said Dr. Patricia Valdez, volunteering 1 afternoon per week. He already is, Reed replied, watching Elias teach a little girl how to play with blocks. I'm just grateful we figured out how to get out of his way. That evening, tallying their first day, 57 people served, 3 potential emergencies, prevented, dozens of families connected with needed resources. Not bad for day one, Amara said, exhausted but exhilarated. I've never felt this tired or satisfied, Reed admitted. Building spreadsheets never gave me this sense of having done something meaningful. 6 months into their new life, Reed received an unexpected call that would test his transformation. Reed, it's your mother. We need to talk. Virginia McAllister's voice carried none of its usual authority. Instead, Reed heard uncertainty, perhaps, vulnerability. What can I do for you, Mother? I've been watching the news coverage of your community work, the health center, the families you're helping. It's quite impressive. Reed waited, knowing his mother well enough to recognize when she was building towards something significant. I've also been watching Elias. He seems genuinely happy in ways I haven't seen since he was very small. He is happy, Mother. He's growing, up feeling completely loved and valued. Yes, I can see that. Virginia's voice grew quieter. Reed, I owe you several apologies. Reed felt his world shift. In 40 years, he'd never heard his mother acknowledge being wrong about anything. I was wrong about Amara, wrong about her motives, character, what she would bring to your family. But more than that, I was wrong about what matters most for a child's development. I convinced myself that social status and financial security were the most important gifts we could give Elias. But watching him now, seeing how confident and compassionate he's become, I realize that unconditional love and authentic family connection matter more than anything money can buy. Reed felt tears building. Mother, do you understand what you cost us? 6 years of Elias without his mother, 6 years of Amara wondering if her son was happy, 6 years of me struggling to be a father without knowing how to love without conditions. I know. And I'm sorry. I'm deeply, profoundly sorry. Would it be possible to meet with Amara, properly meet her as Elias's mother and your partner, with the respect she deserves? Reed considered carefully. I'll talk to Amara, but if you're going to be part of our lives, it has to be without conditions. Amara isn't auditioning for your approval. She's Elias's mother and my wife. I understand. And Reed, I'm proud of the man you've become, the father you've become. That evening, Reed discussed the conversation with Amara while preparing dinner. Together. What do you think? Reed asked. I think forgiveness is usually healthier than holding grudges, Amara said. But Elias's emotional security has to be our priority. The meeting took place the following Sunday. Virginia arrived with a gift for Elias and flowers for Amara, small gestures representing significant departure from her previous approach. Grandmother, Elias hugged her with natural affection. Do you want to see the picture I drew of our family working at the health center? Reed watched his mother's face as Elias showed his artwork, stick figures holding hands around a building with a red cross. This is beautiful, sweetheart. Can you tell me what everyone is doing? That's Mommy helping sick kids with medicine. That's Daddy making sure everyone can afford doctors. And that's me being a helper by playing with little kids while their parents get checkups. Virginia studied the drawing carefully. It sounds like your family does very important work together. We do. And Mommy says when I'm bigger I can learn to be a doctor too, or maybe a teacher. She says the most important thing is helping other people feel safe and happy. Elias, Virginia said carefully, I want to apologize for some things I said before about your family. I didn't understand how wonderful your mommy is. Elias looked at her seriously. It's okay, grandmother. Mommy says sometimes grown-ups make mistakes because they're scared, but that doesn't make them bad people. It just makes them people who need to learn better ways to love. Your mommy sounds very wise, Virginia said, looking at Amara with something like admiration. She is. She knows everything about taking care of people and making scared feelings go away. The visit proceeded with careful but genuine warmth. Virginia asked thoughtful questions about the health center, listened with interest to Amara's explanations, made no condescending comments. Most importantly, she watched Elias interact with both parents with obvious delight in his confidence and natural empathy. He's remarkable, she told Reed as they prepared to leave. You and Amara have given him something I didn't know how to give you, the freedom to be completely himself, without fear of disappointing adults. Reed realized his mother was acknowledging not just mistakes about Amara, but failures in raising children to perform rather than simply exist as beloved family members. "It's not too late, Mother. If you want to be part of Elias's life, we're willing to help you figure that out." "I'd like that very much. I'd like to learn how to be the grandmother he deserves." 2 years after opening the health center, Reed found himself being interviewed for a business magazine about his transition from corporate executive to community healthcare advocate. "Mr. McAllister, do you ever regret giving up your position?" As one of the country's most powerful CEOs, Reed looked around the center's bustling area, where Amara was consulting with a teenage mother while Elias read to the woman's 2-year-old son. "I didn't give up power. I traded the power to control markets for the power to improve lives and strengthen communities. What I'm doing now has more lasting impact than anything I accomplished in the corporate world. But the financial sacrifice must have been significant. I make enough to provide my family with everything we need and some of what we want. We live comfortably, take vacations, save for Elias's education. But we don't need private jets or multiple homes." Reed gestured toward a wall covered with children's artwork, thank you cards, photos of community events. "This is what wealth looks like to me now. We're rich in relationships, rich in purpose, rich in knowing our work makes measurable difference in people's lives." What's your advice for other executives considering significant career changes? The question isn't whether you can afford to make a change. The question is whether you can afford not to. "I spent 20 years accumulating wealth but impoverishing my relationships. I was professionally successful but personally bankrupt." After the reporter left, Reed joined Amara for their weekly staff meeting, reviewing patient statistics and planning outreach events. "We served 437 patients last month," Amara reported. 12% increase from last year. Reed reviewed numbers with pride rather than anxiety. Growth meant more families receiving care, not more profit for shareholders. "Dr. Valdez approached me about establishing a residency program here," Amara continued. "Young doctors specializing in community medicine." Reed felt familiar excitement of building something meaningful. What would that require? Expansion, more rooms, additional equipment, funding for resident salaries. It would double our operation size. How many additional families could we serve? Potentially 800 to 1,000 per month. And we'd be training doctors to see healthcare as community service rather than just private practice. Let's do it. If we can train doctors who understand healthcare as community responsibility, we're not just treating patients, we're changing medical culture. That evening, walking home, Reed reflected on how their family had become a working unit. Elias regularly spent afternoons at the center, doing homework and helping with age-appropriate tasks. "Daddy," Elias said as they paused at a crosswalk, "Marcus says his dad makes more money than you do now. He says that means his family is more successful than ours." Reed knelt to his son's level. "What do you think success means, buddy?" Elias considered seriously. "I think success means your family loves each other, and you help other people when they need it. You don't worry about having the most expensive things. You worry about having the most important things." "And what are the most important things?" "People who are happy to see you when you come home, work that makes the world better, and enough money for ice cream sometimes." Reed laughed at his 8-year-old's wisdom about life priorities. "Plus," Elias added, "Marcus's dad is never home for dinner and misses all the school plays. That doesn't sound very successful to me." Reed realized his son had internalized the most important lesson. That presence was more valuable than presence. That being available was more important than being wealthy. That success should be measured by relationships rather than revenues. Reed has successfully built a new life based on love rather than achievement, creating lasting change that extends beyond his family to his entire community. The final act will show the full flowering of this transformation and its lasting impact. Reed stood at the kitchen window of their modest 3-bedroom house, watching 15-year-old Elias teach neighborhood children how to tend the community garden they'd established next door. The morning light caught his son's easy confidence, as he demonstrated planting techniques to kids who looked up to him with obvious admiration. "Dad, Maria's family wants to plant tomatoes in the section you helped clear," Elias called through the window. "Tell them absolutely, and remind them about the watering schedule." Reed marveled at how naturally his teenage son had inherited their family commitment to community service. While other kids focused on video games and social media, Elias spent weekends teaching younger children about nutrition, helping elderly neighbors, and volunteering at the health center. "Morning, handsome," Amara said, wrapping her arms around Reed's waist. "Coffee's ready, and I have news about the medical school partnership." Good news or challenging news? Both. The University Medical School wants to establish our center as their primary training site for family medicine residents. 50 medical students per year, all learning community-based healthcare. Reed felt familiar excitement of expansion that would serve families rather than generate profit. That's incredible. What's the challenging part? Funding. We'd need to double our space, hire additional physicians, develop curriculum. We're talking about a $2 million expansion. Reed considered the numbers with his analytical approach, but motivated by different priorities than his corporate days. "The remaining investments from my corporate days," Reed said carefully. "The portfolio I've kept as our security fund. It's worth about $1.2 million. I want to donate it all to the expansion." Amara's eyebrows rose. "Reed, that's our entire safety net. Elias's college fund, our retirement savings, and it's also the difference between serving 5,000 families versus 15,000, between training 50 community-minded doctors versus producing physicians who see healthcare as business." Reed took her hands. 10 years ago, I chose love over money for the first time. It was the best decision I ever made. I'm ready to make that choice again, bigger." Amara looked out at the garden where their son was teaching children that growing food required patience and faith. What about Elias's future? College, the financial foundation most parents provide. Elias's future is whatever he chooses. But based on who he's becoming, I think he'd rather have parents who chose service over security, who showed him wealth means using resources to lift up your community. That evening, they called Elias for a family consultation about important decisions. "So you want to use our money to help train doctors who will take care of people who can't afford expensive healthcare," Elias said after processing the information. "Exactly, but it would mean no college fund, no financial safety net." Elias considered this seriously. "Dad, remember when I was little and asked why some kids didn't have doctors like I did? And you said that's why we started the health center. I remember. This is the same thing, just bigger. If we train 50 doctors every year who care more about helping people than making money, that's like 50 health centers opening around the country." "But what about your future, buddy? College costs, opportunities that money could provide." Elias shrugged with casual wisdom. "You taught me the best opportunities come from working hard and caring about people. If I want college, I'll figure out scholarships, work study, student loans like most people. I'd rather grow up in a family that chose to help 15,000 people instead of keeping money we don't really need. That seems more like success to me." Reed felt pride in the young man they'd raised. Someone who understood privilege came with responsibility. That security meant contributing to community strength. "Are you sure? This isn't a decision we can take back." "I'm sure. And Dad, I'm proud of you for being brave enough to choose helping people over having money. That's the kind of father I want to be someday." 6 months later, Reed stood before the City Planning Commission, presenting the final proposal for the McAllister Center for Community Medicine expansion. The room was packed with families they'd served, medical students who'd volunteered, and community leaders who'd witnessed their neighborhood's transformation. "This expansion represents more than additional medical facilities," Reed told the commission. "It represents a fundamental shift in how we train healthcare providers, from a business model focused on profit to a service model focused on community health." Dr. Patricia Valdez stood to address clinical impact. "In 10 years, the McAllister Center has achieved health outcomes rivaling the most expensive private practices, lower emergency room visits, higher preventive care compliance, better chronic disease management. But more importantly, she continued, we've demonstrated that healthcare based on relationships rather than transactions produces better results for everyone. The Commission voted unanimously to approve the expansion. Later, Reed found himself back in the same hospital where this journey had begun, cutting the ribbon on the new Elias McAllister Family Support Wing, spaces designed to ensure no child would face medical crises without their entire family present. Dr. Valdez, Reed said to his colleague and friend, thank you for helping us design spaces that serve families instead of impressing donors. Thank you for understanding that healing happens in relationships as much as medical procedures, she replied. Reed watched Elias, now 16, give tours to younger children visiting for checkups. His son moved through the medical environment with complete comfort, explaining equipment with confidence of someone who'd grown up understanding healthcare as community service. And this is the family kitchen, where parents can make food for May. They're kids, Elias told his small tour group, and the sibling playroom, so if your brother or sister is sick, you don't have to sit in boring waiting rooms. A reporter approached Reed. How does it feel to have your name on a hospital wing after walking away from the corporate world that would have made this philanthropy much easier? Reed considered the question, thinking about different paths his life could have taken, the wealth he could have accumulated, the status he could have maintained. It feels like the most meaningful way to use resources I was fortunate to accumulate. But more importantly, it feels like natural extension of the work our family does every day. Any regrets about the path you chose? Reed looked around at the wing filled with families, medical staff, community members celebrating the opening. He saw Dr. Valdez explaining family support protocols to excited residents. He saw Amara consulting with social workers. He saw Elias teaching a shy 6-year-old how to use interactive displays. My only regret is that it took me so long to understand what actually matters. I wish I'd been brave enough to choose love over status 6 years earlier. But do I regret choosing to be present for my family, building something that serves community rather than accumulating wealth, learning that love is more valuable than luxury? Absolutely not. 1 year after the medical school expansion opened, Reed stood in the original community health center, now serving as the teaching hub for 50 medical residents learning community-based care. The walls were covered with thank you letters in multiple languages, children's artwork, and photos of families whose lives had been changed by accessible healthcare. Elias, now 17 and preparing for college on a full scholarship to study public health, was leading a group of high school volunteers in organizing supplies for their annual community health fair. Dad, Dr. Martinez wants to know if you can help with the blood pressure station, Elias called. Your Spanish is finally good enough to handle intake interviews. Reed laughed at the backhanded compliment. His language skills had improved dramatically, motivated by daily interactions with families whose stories could only be understood through genuine communication. Señora Morales, ¿cómo se siente hoy? Reed asked the elderly woman settling into the screening chair. Mejor, gracias a Dios. The medicine Dr. Amara gave me has helped so much with the headaches. These conversations had taught Reed more about measuring success than all his years analyzing profit margins. Success was Señora Morales playing with grandchildren without debilitating headaches, families no longer choosing between medication and groceries. As the health fair continued around them, Reed found Amara consulting with the newest group of medical residents about family-centered care approaches. Dr. McAllister, one of the residents said, how did you transition from corporate executive to community health advocate? It seems like such a dramatic change. Amara smiled, looking at Reed with the same love and pride that had sustained them through 10 years of building something meaningful together. It wasn't really a career change, Reed answered. It was learning to align my work with my values, instead of sacrificing my values for my work. The business skills transferred, strategic planning, resource management, system optimization, but the motivation changed completely. What's the biggest difference? Another resident asked. In corporate life, I measured success by how much I could extract from relationships, profit from customers, productivity from employees, return on investment from everything. Now I measure success by how much I can contribute to relationships, health to families, opportunity to students, stability to community. Reed looked around at the bustling health center, where medical students were learning that effective healthcare required attention to housing, nutrition, education, and economic stability, not just individual medical interventions. The work is harder in some ways because you can't solve social problems with quarterly strategies. But it's infinitely more satisfying because every day you see direct evidence that your efforts matter. That evening, Reed sat in his backyard, garden with Amara and Elias, reflecting on the journey that had brought them from a broken family to this moment of complete integration between their personal values and professional mission. "Dad," Elias said, looking up from the college acceptance letters he'd been reviewing, "I got into the public health program at Johns Hopkins, full scholarship, plus a work-study position at their community clinic." Reed felt his chest swell with pride, not because of the prestigious school or scholarship, but because his son had chosen a path that would let him serve others while pursuing his own dreams. "That's wonderful, buddy. Are you excited?" "Yeah, but also nervous about leaving you guys. This family, this work, it's been my whole life." Amara reached over to squeeze Elias's hand. "Sweetheart, we didn't build this family to keep you with us forever. We built it to give you the foundation to build your own meaningful life. And the work will be here when you come back," Reed added. "If you want to come back, but whatever you choose, wherever you go, you'll carry these values with you. That's the real legacy, not inheriting a business or trust fund, but inheriting the knowledge that your life can have purpose." Elias nodded, understanding that love meant supporting each other's growth rather than demanding loyalty or proximity. As the sun set over their neighborhood, a community transformed by accessible healthcare, community gardens, and the daily evidence that people could choose service over self-interest, Reed realized they'd come full circle. The emergency room visit that had forced him to confront his failures as a father had led to this: a family, united by shared purpose, a community strengthened by collaborative care, and the knowledge that love, when chosen consistently over easier alternatives, created ripple effects that extended far beyond any individual life. "Healing doesn't mean the damage never existed," Reed said quietly, remembering the quote that had guided their transformation. "It means the damage no longer controls our lives." In the garden of their love, every season had brought new growth. They'd planted seeds that took years to bloom, tended relationships through storms and droughts, but with patience, presence, and unwavering commitment, they'd created beauty that would last forever. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of what truly matters in life, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more healing stories that celebrate the power of love, family, and second chances.